Welcome to the Way to Indiecast, everybody, the official podcast of way2indie.com. I'm your host, Bernard Boo, a writer at Way2Indie, coming to you from the Bay Area in California. And joining me today on the show are two of my good buddies, Susan Kemp, another writer at Way2Indie, coming to you from Southern California. How you doing, Susan?
I'm doing great.
And what city are you from again?
I'm from Whittier, which is on the border of LA County and Orange County, so it's like being, non-committal.
Yeah. Also joining me is the dastardly dissenter himself, hailing from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, CJ Prince.
Hello. How was WrestleMania?
I'll get into that. I will get into that.
Okay, good.
Yeah, just to say,
good.
I will get into it.
I can't wait.
But before I do that, I have to introduce our special guest for today's episode of the podcast. He's from San Francisco, California, and he's a writer at Next Projection, Screen Invasion, and VeryAware.com. My good buddy, Mel Valentin.
Hi there. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. It's a pleasure to have you. You're also a fellow member of the San Francisco Film Critic Circle, of which I'm somehow a member.
Not somehow. You belong there. You belong there.
But yeah, we're good friends. You've been one of my first friends I made since joining the film critic scene here in San Francisco. But yeah, we're happy to have you. And I thought, Mel, you're kind of a big comic book fan, right?
I have been on and off. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah,
I go through my waves of reading and then stopping and then reading again. So often there's like a 4 or 5 year break in there, and I'm like, oh, comic books. And I live near a comic book store, and I wander in there every once in a while to see what's new. So, but yeah, I think I probably started when I was like 5 or 6.
Yeah, I'm a big comic book fan, but also on and off like yourself. But since you were the special guest on today's show, I thought we'd talk about comics. Our two segments today, our two main segments, are going to be about comic books, comic book movies, past and I guess upcoming, and also comic book TV shows. And not just superhero comic books, but also like stuff like A History of Violence, which was actually a graphic novel to begin with. So that'll be our first segment. And our second segment, we're going to talk about comic books that we would like to see on the big screen or the TV screen. Comics we've read that we think might translate well. But before that, we've got to talk about WrestleMania, like CJ mentioned. I was not here for last week's episode of the Indiecast because I was living my childhood dream, my boyhood dream of going to WrestleMania. I've been watching wrestling since I was a baby, pretty much. I had all the plush dolls from the 80s, and
Really?
Yeah, man. I've been a lifelong fan, and I had one of the best days of my life last Sunday at WrestleMania. So that's all I'll say. The Rock's cooking smelled like he was there, and no one was.
Strawberries?
I wasn't expecting him to be there, but he was cooking a strawberry tart. But it was amazing. He came out and he teamed up with Miss Ronda Rousey. I'm also a big UFC fan. And he and Ronda Rousey teamed up. It was a pretty cool moment. But I had the time of my life. I was sad to miss the episode, but you guys did a great job last week.
Oh, thank you. We tried our best.
Yeah, it was a good show. It was a really good show. But for this show, we've got a fresh new batch of indie recommendations for you. The segment we start every episode with now. So for our indie picks, let's start with our special guest. Let's start with our guest. Guest first. Mel, what's your indie pick for this week?
My indie pick for this week will be The Salt of the Earth. It's co-directed by Wim Wenders. He's been making films for like 40 years. It's just, fantastic film. It's a documentary. It's about Sebastião Salgado, the Brazilian photographer who also has been working for about 40, 50 years. And it's just really insightful, illuminating about his process, but also about just his personal history, his family history. And it's beautifully photographed as you would expect. Salgado, from the beginning, worked in black and white monochrome. And a lot of his images are just incredibly stunning, stark, beautiful. Some would say too beautiful, considering that, the subject matter of his projects, which were 5-10 years in length, were sort of underclass, downtrodden. He took trips through South America to sort of the byways, the backwaters, the places that weren't being seen or photographed by anyone else. And one of them, a series are centered on Brazilian gold mine. And if you see that in the film, you just see these men covered in mud from head to toe, and there are hundreds, if not thousands of them in this giant pit and mine. and he was just able to go there and spend a lot of time. And that's one of the key things about his approach, was that he would go wherever he was going to photograph, and not just sort of drop in, take some photographs and drop out. He would spend weeks or months getting to know the people, and then taking photographs along the way, and essentially getting their permission and becoming part of that. And then it also becomes sort of a history of his family, his older son, who's a documentary filmmaker, who co-directed Salt of the Earth, and a bit about his wife. The one sort of drawback is that his wife seems to have been, a really important presence, not only because she held the fort, kept the family together the entire time he was gone, and he'd be gone for 3 to 6 to 9 months at a time, but also it seems from, you only hear about it sort of secondhand, that she was really instrumental in picking the projects, picking his photographs, really sort of helping him as a partner. You only really see her at the end. You almost assume early on that she's passed away, because you only see her in photographs. And then all of a sudden, the last half hour, there she is, and she's really, they're both like in their 70s, but they're really vibrant and really healthy, and just, they're just still full of life. But it's a fantastic documentary.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching that one. I have a screener sitting on my table that I haven't gotten to, but I'm so excited. I think this one will probably be Netflix bound, right, guys?
Most likely, yeah. But one of the things about with documentaries is, you can watch them online, you can watch them on your computer for the most part. They're not often visually, or they're not cinematic. Especially, I would even say something like Going Clear, that just came out last week, on HBO, and I saw it at Sundance. It's not essential you see in a cinema, but I think Salt of the Earth, because of the quality of the photographs that he took and the way they're shown on a larger screen, really benefits from that. So if you can't see it on the biggest screen I suggest it.
I'm really looking forward to that one. Susan, what do you got for us this week? What's your pick?
I decided to check out a documentary on Netflix called Out of the Clear Blue Sky, which I guess it's from 2012, but it's just been streaming on Netflix for the last couple of months. And it's actually a story about 9/11. And I'm usually hesitant towards that sort of, emotional bait. It feels like it's truly like enlightening something, and not just like kind of trying to monopolize on a terrible situation. But basically what it's about is there was one company in particular that was on the top floor. They're called Cantor Fitzgerald, and they lost 658 employees on 9/11, wow, which is like out of a total like 900 staff. Basically the people who lived where they had a UK office, and then there was the random like the CEO, was taking his kid to his first day of kindergarten and stuff. And the story is less about just kick you in the heart tragedy, like, which it does, but it's more about like setting the record straight. Like, it kind of reminds me of that McDonald's documentary. I feel like in the media, that woman who spilled coffee and sued, and everyone was like, oh, you're just a complainer and stuff, and then you see that she had like really bad burns and stuff. I feel like it's a documentary like that, like it's setting some of the records straight, because the CEO, he was on a lot of talk shows at the time and was just crying, which he's not like a crier guy, but like he lost his brother. He was under an incredible amount of stress, like basically making sure the company doesn't fold, getting people paid, but, having no staff. They lost like their entire marketing team or something. First, they were sympathetic towards him in the media, and then they kind of made him look like an asshole, because like stories were coming out that families weren't getting paid, and the honest thing is they lost their HR department. They had no HR. So like, it was kind of complicated. And I think a lot of what makes a good documentary is access, which they clearly have because there is so much media. The other thing is you need a good story, and there obviously is one here because the company is still going. It's kind of like a David versus Goliath type story of against all odds, like this company, this is like what you really want from a film like that. And I thought it was really good. And it's on Netflix.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to check that one out. That sounds really cool. I love the documentary love as well.
Yeah.
Let's see if we continue the trend with CJ. What do you have for us?
Well, not a documentary, but
God
it
damn
is.
It is.
Damn it, yeah, I know I'm dissenting again. It's actually based on real life incidents. Although this is going to be a tough sell, but it is a really fantastic movie. It's called Charlie Victor Romeo. This is an adaptation of a play that I think started around 1999 or 2000. The film is directed by Robert Berger, Patrick Daniels, and Carla Michelson. So the play is essentially the film opens with a title card that essentially says you're about to see reenactments of 6 plane crashes. They took the transcripts from the black box.
Oh, I know it. Yes, right.
And yeah, so they took the transcripts of the black box recordings, and they more or less had actors directly just act out what was on there. They said they made slight adjustments for clarity's sake, but it's pretty much straight transcripts. The film is pretty much just a very simple setup. It's pretty much just filming the play, like film theater. It's not really elaborate. It's very simple. In its setup and staging, but it's incredibly effective. It's very obviously a set. It's not trying to be as accurate as possible with the design. But it's an incredibly intense film because you might not understand what these people are saying because they're using a lot of technical jargon that obviously people who know. Who work in the aviation industry would know, but it's just the feeling of like being on the verge of death and trying to save your life and doing everything you can just translates through so well that it doesn't even matter what they're saying. It's the immediacy and the urgency of the situation, and it really pulls you in from the start, and it gets really, really intense. And I watched this movie. I heard about it premiered at Sundance a few years ago, so I watched it, and it blew me away. I was really taken back by how good it was. Obviously, if you are a frequent flyer or you are going to fly soon, don't watch it or hold off because I mean, everyone says this after seeing it, but it is like the Jaws for planes. You're going to be terrified of flying after you see it because you're watching crashes. And every crash starts out the same way. It basically is, it just tells you the flight, it shows the reenactment, and then when it ends, you find out what caused a plane to crash and how many people died. If any died at all. There are some crashes where everyone dies, some crashes where no one dies.
That sounds fascinating.
It's just really visceral and intense. And yeah, so I that film is currently available on iTunes and also streaming on Netflix right now.
Fantastic. I'm gonna watch all this shit. I'm doing all of this tonight.
No, you
this
won't.
Is mine.
Wait, well, what about Mad Men? What about Mad Men?
You know what? I'm not caught up on Mad Men.
Oh.
And it's not on till like 10 p.m. anyways.
Okay, well,
bedtime.
You can catch
You
up
have like
between now and
7
then.
hours.
Yeah, I've got
all these
maybe if I
movies.
just fast forward
No.
through the whole thing and not listen to the dialogue. But anyways, my pick for today is a little indie called Man from Reno. It's a neo-noir that takes place in San Francisco about a Japanese crime novelist who takes a trip to San Francisco after her fame in Japan just got to her, and she was overwhelmed with the paparazzi and all that shit. So she takes a trip to SF on the low, and while in SF, she meets another Japanese traveler who, he's a handsome man, and they have a little hanky-panky in a San Francisco hotel room. And afterwards, he disappears without a trace and leaves a suitcase and a bunch of thugs who want what's inside said suitcase, which the crime novelist has to kind of protect. Although since she's a crime novelist, she also has the curiosity to follow the trail of clues that are left by her mysterious hookup. Also, you're running parallel to that story is a sheriff in a town close to San Francisco who accidentally hits a man on a kind of empty road late at night in the fog, and then the man he hit kind of disappears from the hospital when he goes to check in on him. So it's a crime mystery set in San Francisco, which is really cool for me because I don't think enough movies take place in San Francisco, and I also live around here. And I also had a chat with the director Dave Boyle a few days ago, which that chat should be going up on the site by the time you're listening to this. And I thought it was really great. I thought it was a really tense movie that should be retro because it's kind of like a throwback to old noirs, but it doesn't feel retro. It feels modern, and it feels it's really intense and it's really mysterious, and I love it. I love the movie, and everyone check that one out. I think you can watch it at your local film festival.
It got a very I actually looked this up because I actually now that I read more about it, I'm like, oh shit, why did this go under my radar? It looks really good. So I checked it up, and it's only getting a limited theatrical release. I don't know about VOD or anything yet.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll end up somewhere where you can easily reach it. But I highly recommend it. Ananda, another writer from the site, saw it at LA Film Festival last year and loved it as well. So yeah, that's my pick for this week. So that's gonna do it for our indie picks. A lot of great picks that I'm probably personally gonna check out. All three of yours that you brought up, really good stuff.
I'm gonna call you out on that next time. I don't think
I'm gonna do it. Like, those movies all sounded awesome, and I can actually watch them.
Yeah, Netflix.
Yeah, I could definitely watch them. They're not like Tomorrow Is Always Ready or whatever the one is. What did you suggest to me, CJ?
Make Way for Tomorrow.
Make Way
it
for
is
Tomorrow.
An amazing movie.
Make Way for Tomorrow.
The 1930s movie?
Yes, a Leo McCarey film. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is fantastic. Yeah,
Bernard won't. He's like, it's the least evocative title. I don't know. I can't find it.
No, that's not the reason I'm not watching it. I'm not watching it because it's hard to find.
It's coming out in May on Criterion Blu-ray. It's available on DVD.
Which means
now
that you literally can't watch it right now.
No, it should be available via DVD. I mean, it was.
Yeah, it is. It's on DVD via Criterion. It's just getting a Blu-ray upgrade.
We're gonna do a whole episode of our other show, Criterion Club, where we just talk about Make Way for Tomorrow. How about
There's gonna be. I feel like the final. Like, we're gonna get over this hurdle. You're gonna watch that movie one day, and then you're gonna grovel. You're gonna grovel to me and be like, "Why did I ignore this movie?"
Bernard, I have the DVD that you can borrow.
Oh, there we
shit!
Go.
There we go. Everyone, Bernard's gonna watch it, and then go watch Criterion Club, where you get the conclusion to this exciting saga.
Yeah, this is the saga of Make Way for Tomorrow. I promise, I'm gonna pick it up from Mel at the next screening we go to, and I'm gonna watch the shit out of it.
Make Way for Tomorrow on
Make
your
Way.
watch list.
Make way for Tomorrow. But anyways, that's my future watching plans that we've just outlined for the next 48 hours. But now we're going to move into our first major segment of the show, where we're going to talk about comic book movies or graphic novel movies, past, present, and future. Ones we've seen and maybe liked or disliked, and ones that are coming up. There are a lot of big ones coming out this year. From Marvel's Avengers to the big Batman and Superman crossover movie that I can't believe even exists, being a comic book fan. It's really incredible. I think comic book movies are in a good place right now, which is making the little boy in me very excited. So we want to open this by talking about the difference between comic books and graphic novels, and we're going to include all of them, any comic books, any graphic novels. I think, Mel, you might be the best equipped to explain the difference.
Well, just sort of, I think, as super basic, comic book comes out on a monthly basis, and you're looking at it's some, in the industry, people call it floppies because they have, usually don't have hard covers. They're just soft covers, and they can be flopped around, and they're originally weren't meant obviously to be kept and stored in any way, shape, or form, but later on collectors started doing that, and now the quality is obviously improved over the last few decades, including the printing quality, so that you can bag and board them and save them for your kids, your grandkids, or just for yourself when you're old and want to read comics when you're 85. And graphic novels, the terms sort of become interchangeable. Often the way comic books are written are usually in arcs of anywhere from 4 to 6 issues because they're easy to collect. So then you'll see something like, graphic novel for the Avengers, but really that's just a collection of the comic books. And in graphic novels, technically were made specifically to be released at one time. So you can have a 120-page or 200-page, collection. Well, it's not a collection, a story, all sent, issued, published at one time. And usually comic books will never end, especially Marvel and DC.
Yeah, they'll never end.
Where graphic novels usually have a self-contained story. So once you're done, you're done. Like you were mentioning earlier, History of Violence and Road to Perdition, they tell a self-contained story, right. And that's it. I mean, they might have sequels, but that story itself is meant to have a beginning, middle, and end, and as opposed to comic books that aren't.
Right, and we're not going to be just talking about superhero comic book movies either. We're going to be talking about, like you said, History of Violence and Road to Perdition and stuff like that. But let's get the ball rolling here. And what are some comic book movies that you guys have enjoyed or really hated in the past? I know that they, earlier in the 90s and early 2000s, they were more on the hated side of things as far as quality goes. But
I will bring up, Bernard and I have had a trade of blows before on here when we talked about Marvel films. I'm not a big fan of Marvel films, but I'll bring up a Marvel film that I really like. I'll bring up two Marvel movies that I really liked. And it kind of addresses problems that I feel are one of the biggest problems for me personally watching comic book movies, which is how do you generate tension when you know your protagonist is always going to, turn out okay. That's comic book movies. They're serialized by nature. They're going to keep going. So for films, if you're trying to generate tension, you have to take away from the idea of the fate. Let's say the protagonist. Obviously, they're going to survive. I think that's why I didn't like the Avengers, because the climactic scene hinged on the fate of Tony Stark, and it's like they're not going to kill Tony Stark. Like, it's no tension at all. That's just me. So I'll bring up two examples that I think found ways to sidestep that. Thor, which I know some people are not the biggest fans of, but I actually like Thor quite a bit because it was more of a kind of a let's say coming of age tale, or it was more about Thor getting over his immaturity and becoming a better person, and I enjoyed that arc a lot watching the film. And I thought it was a really just clever way to avoid the issues I tend to find. The other one is Iron Man 3. I'm just a huge...
That's the one I haven't seen.
Oh, I think it's the best one. Yeah, I think it's better than the first Iron Man. Shane Black is just fantastic. I mean, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is just a really great movie, and I really wish he could make a sequel already. But he just basically, it's like he just is like, I'm just gonna make really great, entertaining action sequences, and that's what he does. I mean, you have these like it's just great action direction and a lot of great scenes being created. So it's just on a purely entertainment level, it's just great on that front, I guess. So those are two examples, just comic book movies that I think I really enjoyed, and I specifically picked Marvel because I know that I have the reputation of being like so anti-Marvel, but some of them are good.
Yeah, some of them are good. It depends on the filmmaker, right? There's still movies at the end of the day. But Mel, what about you? What are some comic book movies you've really enjoyed?
Well, I hate to say that my least favorite are the Thor movies and Iron Man 2 and 3. I mean, Iron Man 2 was really super clunky. Probably
yeah,
because,
that was bad. Yeah.
Because they were trying to do the universe setup. They're trying to expand it, and I think they've learned how to do it much better in subsequent films. So sort of just shoehorning the side plot that takes over an entire hour to resolve, and then you realize, wait a second, the main villain shows up for the first half hour, and then the last half hour. And in between, he's doing nothing except like tinkering, right?
Right.
That doesn't really make him particularly dangerous. And and my other problem with the Iron Man movies is there's always a rich. Well, I don't want to use I don't know how much obscenities are allowed on here, but a rich jerk industrialist as one of the villains or the main villain, and I just feel like that was so tired and played out. I know a lot of people had issues with the way the Mandarin was handled in the third film, and not to sort of get to, all the sort of minor details about that, because comic book fans are like, oh, it's, turning the character inside out. And
you know what? I haven't seen the film, and it still hasn't been spoiled for me what the twist is.
Okay, well then I won't.
Yeah, that's cool. It's cool. I'm excited.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually I liked how they handled. I'm not familiar with the comics at all though, so I don't have that kind of mindset going in of knowing what was original versus what was adapted. So I actually liked the Mandarin in the film. I thought that was actually well done. But
right, well, to me, it was less that it's treated as a joke. It wasn't that he was turning the character inside out. It was just how he did it, or the execution didn't do much for me. And I kind of felt when I walked out of Iron Man 3 that I was kind of ready for a break from Marvel. And 5-6 years earlier, I would never have said that. When the first Iron Man came out, and I was never actually a big Iron Man fan, and I thought Favreau and his team did a fantastic job of establishing the character, creating the backstory, really creating a nice arc for the character. And I still think that's almost the best, pretty close to probably the best Marvel movie in my opinion.
Yeah,
the first Iron Man movie, and then also Captain America: Winter Soldier.
Oh my God, that movie is so good.
The two for me, and I have a bias because Captain America was like my favorite childhood superhero. I might have mentioned this, a cousin who was a really big comic book fan and was actually a fairly decent artist. I mean, I still have him, but I haven't been in touch with him for years. And he used to do these, fantastic pinups, and he did one of Captain America for me that I kept for years and had up on a wall, and it was really well done. And I was like, okay, this is, he represents everything that's great about America, and American exceptionalism, and he always does the right thing regardless of the circumstance, and sometimes that means not following orders, and that was sort of a great part of the character, is that he doesn't stray from his values. And I think Winter Soldier really picked up on that. Some of the action sequences there I felt were just a little chaotically directed.
As always.
Which to me is an indication that the directors weren't quite sure what to do. You have Chris Evans, who's a great physical actor. I think, up and down the line, they've picked actors who can really do the work, can do at least some of the stunts. Obviously, they have to get people to step in for the more dangerous, crazy stunts. But overall, it was really a solid film. And again, it felt like it was fairly self-contained and didn't rely too much on setting up the next film or the next 2 or 3 films the way some of the earlier ones have done. One of the great things I know, the earlier comment about the Marvel problem, which is the fake deaths, to me, it's like, okay, how many times can you do that? I think Captain America did that several times. They all seem to do that, right? But that the stakes aren't very particularly.
Yeah, but people who are familiar with the Captain America comics and Steve Rogers know that it might get real sometime soon.
Right,
well, might get real.
We're going to do Civil War, right? After Avengers: Age of Ultron, they're going to do the Civil War storyline, and that, I think, can really open up some possibilities. And I hope they do sort of go in that direction. And I'm also, to go over on the DC side, obviously, Dark Knight, I think, is sort of the high point for them and just in general. I'm also an apologist for Man of Steel. It has its problems, don't get me wrong, but I'm not one of the haters who just tore it apart, within seconds of it coming out.
Susan, have you seen Man of Steel?
No, I haven't, but I think I'd actually like to segue from what he was saying, because I was going to bring up The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
Because the reason I like a film like that is because I feel like it's a bit self-contained. Like, I feel like a lot of times with superhero movies, they kind of expect you to know the lore. And so it's like so cool if X character is there because, oh my God, we know and love X character.
Right.
But, in The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger and, Two-Face and Joker, they're so interesting. They're so engaging. Like, they are, like, so alive. They make the movie, right? That I think that anybody who's just into cool, exciting, interesting, larger-than-life characters are going to love the movie. It's, like, almost like a character film, too. And so I really like that.
Yeah, I love The Dark Knight. I think it's because really anyone who's seen that movie knows it's not a superhero movie. I mean, it plays more like Martin Scorsese crime drama. One of the most memorable shots is of Batman, Harvey Dent, and Commissioner Gordon standing on a roof talking. So I love that about that movie. And Ledger's performance is just it'll haunt me forever. Pretty much, it's one of the saddest things ever is that we didn't get to see more from him.
Absolutely.
But I'd say to throw something in the hat for me, it would be I'm gonna stray away from the superhero stuff, and I'm gonna say Old Boy is
right.
is what is amazing. I still watch that movie occasionally. I think a lot of people do, just still kind of live with that movie, and it's one of my favorites, and it was based on a manga. Which I'll have to admit I haven't read the manga. It's super obscure, but it's still technically a comic book movie. It's by Park Chan-wook, of course, and I don't know. I think, do I have to talk about what this movie's about? I think
everyone's familiar
knows.
With it. But Old Boy's a great pick. Like that's Old Boy's one of those like movies growing up that I saw, and it kind of really like influenced me and made me want to really be like, I want to watch movies and enjoy them, because Old Boy was just I saw it when I was maybe like 13, and when you see that ending at that age,
oh my God,
your mind is just like your mind just explodes and shatters into pieces. And
Can I throw in a recommendation? If you haven't seen, and it's fairly obscure, Brian De Palma, was sort of known for cribbing off of Hitchcock a lot in his career, the 70s and 80s. And he basically did a remake of Vertigo called Obsession in the mid-70s with Cliff Robertson and Genevieve Bujold. And it's a fantastic story. Again, it's a riff on actually Vertigo. Bernard Herrmann stepped in, one of his last scores.
Nice.
Before he passed away. So I highly recommend it. No spoilers. Great kicker ending, and sort of high melodrama mystery that's really worth your time.
That's cool. That's a cool recommendation. I haven't seen that De Palma, but I love De Palma, and especially when he he riffs on Hitchcock, which he does quite often.
Quick unrelated shadow, but I feel like if we're going to be talking about great graphic novel adaptations, Scott Pilgrim versus the World has to be mentioned.
Hey.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, Scott Pilgrim's great. I also want to throw in there Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy movie and the sequel. I think those are both really awesome. I love the just Guillermo del Toro's visuals. His the imagination going on in all of his movies. It just kind of floors me every time. So Hellboy, I think, are exceptional comic book movies that are actually superhero movies and are some of the best superhero movies out there.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the second one didn't do well enough to merit a third. It doesn't look like.
I know. That makes me so sad.
And there's so many other stories set in the Hellboy universe. Mike Mignola sort of expanded out so that he's really sort of created his own, Marvel universe or DC universe. So he's got 7 or 8 different comic books running at the same time, and it sort of would have been great to include some of that stuff in there too.
Yeah, Mike Mignola is amazing, and also Guillermo del Toro has said in a weird statement. He said that every film he's made takes place in the same universe, including Hellboy. Which is hilarious to me. I feel like he's fucking with us, but
he has to be. Yes,
he has to be. But anyways, let's say, how about everybody give one comic book movie that they really, really despise and they found painful to watch. I think there might be some overlap here, so we'll see who gets to Man of Steel first. But anyway,
well, I'm the Man of Steel apologist.
That's right. So I'll get you. So okay, so CJ, what's a comic book movie you really hate?
Well, it's a tie between 300 and Watchmen. They're horrible movies. Zack Snyder is a horrible director. I will never watch Man of Steel. I will never watch anything by that annoying frat boy. Although frat boy might be a little too mature. Let's say 13-year-old prepubescent grade 8 mentality bullshit. I hate Zack Snyder. And it's unfortunate.
This is awesome.
Because I like Dawn of the Dead remake quite a bit. And then he just was like, oh, I'm going to do a lot of shitty, stupid camera tricks. And I'm going to slow it down and then ramp it up and then slow it down. And people are like, whoa, this is the most amazing thing, bro. And it's horrible. It's dog shit filmmaking. The Watchmen adaptation is so bad and misguided. I read the graphic novel. I liked it. I see the movie and I'm like, what is this? You do not translate the story at all whatsoever. You focus so hard on the style and nailing down the look and Frank Miller's, style and aesthetics and stuff, but you just completely tank the screenplay. I think that Zack Snyder is just this awful director, and I think
Moore. Wait, hold on, wasn't Alan Moore?
Alan Moore. I'm sorry, I'm thinking Frank Miller. Oh my god, thank you. I'm you know what? Because I was debating between Sin City as well. Although actually no, I just think Frank Miller. I find Sin City entertaining, but I think Frank Miller is just shit. All of his stories are kind of really juvenile. That's why I guess 300 is a perfect match for Zack Snyder, even though I also couldn't stand 300. So yeah, those two movies. Alan Moore. I feel like he was just so obsessed with nailing it down that he completely ignored everything else. So it was just this very nonsensical, overly convoluted movie that had a lot of shitty style. I just don't like Zack Snyder at all.
That's what I want to see from you, CJ. I like that fire. I like you with the fire lit up.
Yeah, I got fire. You should play air horns over that in post.
Mel, what's a comic book movie that you can't stand?
CJ basically got there ahead of me. 300 is probably I would consider the worst adaptation, but that has less to do with Zack Snyder, and I'm not a Snyder apologist, despite the fact of the feelings I have that are positive about Man of Steel. But I think he's only as good or as bad as the material. I'm willing to cut him a lot of slack on Watchmen because it is really almost unadaptable, and
right.
Given the length and the complexity and the way Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons structured that, it's a 12-part miniseries basically. And it has so much going on. There's so many, plot points and backstory elements that are really hard to compress. It really should have been made a miniseries for cable. I mean, now we can imagine sort of something like Game of Thrones, a 12-part series would have been fantastic, I think.
Right.
And probably not with Zack Snyder involved, but trying to turn it into a 2.5 hour film, I think was already sort of destined to fail in a lot of ways, and it did. But 300 to me, a lot of that has to do with Frank Miller and Frank Miller's politics, which I find odious. And there's just no way around it. Walking out of 300, I really just felt repelled, repulsed, disgusted by it all. And I rarely have that kind of visceral reaction to a movie the way I did to that. And sitting in a theater, when it came out, which was 2007, we're still in the Iraq War. There are all these, things happening around the world, and being in an audience that's cheering, all the, the war and the violence and, the chest thumping really, really got to me. It's like, wow, it's hard to divorce the fact that they're making this film the way they made this film, and it really ends up being sort of, an apology or, an excuse for, the United States, despite of being practically equivalent in the film, always doing the right thing, and everything's always in defense of some territory or national interests, et cetera. And plus the fact that it was both, just confused about its like sort of gender politics, so like homophobic, homoerotic, and you're like, what the hell? He just imagined Xerxes, at one point just like picking up a sandal and throwing it at the Spartans, and I just thought that was just fantastic and true. The way the film just really just felt like it was just all these subconscious things that were happening, and Frank Miller were just sort of blurted out onto the page, into the and now onto the screen. And
exotica porn, I always hate that when it's like anything that's not what we know is like so exotic and weird and strange, and that's like all that is. It's like, oh, apparently if you're not from around here, you're an 8-foot effeminate monster, or you're this demon mask pig face person. Like, it's so stupid. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't just the politics for me, it was just bad filmmaking. I just hate Zack Snyder's direction.
Yeah, 300 also one I did. I think I didn't hate it when I first watched it, and then I watched it again, and I was like, wow, like this is really bad. But I think the one I'll throw in there is Blade Trinity.
Oh my god, I was gonna say.
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan. I cut you off. Well, okay, let's do this as our joint pick, Susan. Blade Trinity by David S. Goyer, who also wrote the script. I think the thing that made Blade Trinity sting really bad was that the one that came before Blade 2 was directed by Guillermo del Toro, and it was really, really great. And then Blade Trinity came along, and it was that's probably the worst comic book movie I've ever seen. Personally, is terrible action, terrible choreography, terrible staging. I guess Parker Posey's okay in it because she's always interesting to watch. But Ryan Reynolds is in it before he learned how to act, and Triple H is in it. Speaking of WrestleMania, Triple H is in it for some reason.
I guess I didn't hate it, but it's just like such a disappointment because it's almost like one of those movies that makes you like the whole franchise less because it exists. Yes. Like if it didn't come out, you would totally like the other films more. And it's like kind of like they're relying so much on the brand. Like I hate when people do that. Like they just like come up with all these new characters and then they like kill them off. They're like, just kidding.
Yeah. That we'll leave on that piece of shit as far as the ones we hate. But coming up, what are you guys' most anticipated comic book movies for this year? There's some, or maybe you don't have one, CJ. I'm thinking maybe you don't have one.
You are correct.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I had to sing song it apparently. I don't know why.
Yeah. Well, I will say the most anticipated comic book project for me this year is Daredevil, which is coming out this coming Friday. It's one of my favorite comics, written by many excellent writers, such as Frank Miller and Brian Michael Bendis and Ed Brubaker have all taken a swing at Daredevil, and it's a really great story, great character. Takes place
Kevin
in
Smith.
Kevin
Smith.
About Kevin. I did. He
actually did have a pretty good arc on Daredevil. Surprisingly enough, yes.
Yeah, and it's a great comic, and I think it's going to make for a great TV show that's coming out on Netflix because it's unlike the other Marvel movies because it largely exists outside of the Marvel bubble. Daredevil kind of keeps to himself, even as far as the storylines go. He just likes to hang out in Hell's Kitchen and fight crime there, fight the Kingpin. Yeah, it's a noir, cool looking character, great backstory. Mel, you're a fan, I assume.
Yes, I am. But yeah, what I find interesting is that the Netflix deal and all these other. There's supposed to be two more other series or 4, right? Jessica Jones, Luke Cage.
Oh, I'm so excited for that one too.
Immortal Iron Fist. Speaking of Ed Brubaker. He and Matt Fraction did a run on Immortal Iron Fist about 5-6 years ago.
It was really good.
It was such a fantastic fantastic run. And I guess, they didn't sell enough copies, so they moved them off to other projects, and then it just kind of tailed off and then, kind of faded away. And I think they eventually canceled it, and then they've done some team ups. But it was such a great series. They expanded that universe in really fascinating, terrific ways. And I would love to see that, absolutely love to see that. Live action or even animated. And I mean, that's supposed to be down the road, I guess, at some point. I don't think there's even really been any casting.
Yeah, it'll be great. It'll be like the kind of mature indie flavored Marvel
right.
line of superheroes. But Susan, do you have anything that you're looking forward to this year?
I'm not sure if I'd say looking forward to, but have you guys heard anything about this Ant-Man movie?
I've heard a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, as someone who's not really into comics, like, is it something you're into? Is it something that's going good?
Not me.
Not
I'm
at all.
not into it.
It looks like it's just, I don't know. I feel like Marvel is just cocky, and they're like, we can make anything.
It's kind of frustrating because I feel like there's so many people who do comics. Like, I went to an art school, and there were so many people in the sequential program, and some of them are doing independent comics, and they're really fascinating. And it seems like unless you have a big brand behind you, you can't do anything. And so we end up with things like this, so.
Well, yeah, Ant-Man, it was actually, I mean, I don't know if the comics were that great, but the character's pretty cool. The original Ant-Man, Hank Pym, he's one of the Avengers, or not the original Avengers, but one of the early Avengers. And it's a great character, but that movie just doesn't appeal to me at all.
Yeah, well, speaking of after Edgar Wright stepped off of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, all that whole mess. I mean, he'd been sort of working on that script for 5, 6, 7 years, and it was so they were ready to start production, and then Marvel stepped in. It's always kind of murky what actually happened behind the scenes for him to leave, but it sounded like they wanted to obviously have him make additional rewrites, and he just basically said, "I've had enough," and that was it, and he moved off of it, and that's really too bad. So yeah, before Edgar Wright left, I was really curious as to see what was going to happen with that.
Edgar Wright's
and now I'm like. Yeah, and now I'm like, whatever. I'll obviously still see it, but I won't have the same level of anticipation.
Yeah, and there's always we've always got Avengers coming out this summer as well. And I really enjoyed the first Avengers movie. So I guess this year we'll see what happens with Avengers and also Ant-Man. But that'll wrap it up for our first segment of today's show: comic book movies, past, present, and future. But now, after the break, we're going to come back and talk about some comic books that we think would make for excellent movies. See you guys soon. You're listening to the Way Too Indiecast, the official podcast of WayTooIndie.com, where you'll find film news, reviews, and interviews with an emphasis on indie. Follow us on Twitter at Way2Indie and like us on Facebook. Hey guys, we're back talking about comic books on today's episode of the podcast. And now that we're done talking about comic book movies that already exist, we're going to talk about some that don't exist yet. We're going to talk about some comic books that we think would make for some great movies or TV shows. I think a lot of them might make for better TV shows, so we'll leave that open to whoever makes a suggestion. But there are plenty to choose from for anyone who reads comics. There's so many great comic books and comic book series that haven't been adapted yet that I think really need to be. Mel, you're probably the biggest comic book fan out of all of us. What are some of your suggestions?
Well, we already sort of talked about Immortal Iron Fist, and hopefully that happens.
That is happening.
That is happening. Right, it is happening. Yeah. I mean, I just haven't heard anything else about it, like casting or dates or anything like that. And I just, I'm really anticipating that. And sort of connecting that to Matt Fraction, he did a series called Casanova, which was absolutely super wild. I mean, it's almost indescribable. It's really what sort of put his stamp on comic book writing, and he got, tons of notice. It was an independent comic. It's basically the main character is sort of like this 60s era super spy, and it just throws in so many like science fiction ideas and just bizarre ideas, different timelines, clones and robots. It's like a kitchen sink type of property. And he did, multiple, I think it's still running, but obviously now he's doing the major comic books, as is his wife. And so we don't see as much of it. But the art for that too, if you haven't checked it out, Brazilian artist named Gabriel Ba.
Wonderful. It's
fantastic. Oh, it's just really, really great art too. So you can appreciate it on a story level, and it's really, really dense. And you can almost tell how he started with this really dense structure, and then when he went to Marvel, had to really start to kind of loosen that up a lot. And not compress or not put too many ideas in on one page or one panel as he did with Casanova. So that would be one of my top choices. And we're also going to see a Doctor Strange movie. I'm looking forward to that. I'm a little wary just because now we're really going to be moving magic into the Marvel universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I've never felt that those fit in well together. They kind of did that a little bit with Thor and like, oh, it's super science, don't worry about it. It's not really magic. So I don't know if they're going to still continue that route or they're really just going to call it magic and do that, or have it sort of exist in a pocket universe or, side universe, the way the Daredevil show is going to start or going to be. But I imagine it's not. I imagine Doctor Strange eventually is going to join the Avengers or appear in some of the other films. And we talked about this the other day too. Planetary by Warren Ellis.
Oh, yeah.
Would be a fantastic series. Again, that would probably be better as a series than as a movie or a series of movies. So I would probably throw that out there as my number one choice to see Planetary.
Planetary is great, but speaking of Warren Ellis, I've got another Warren Ellis. He's a great writer. One of my favorites since I was a kid. But Warren Ellis has another story that's more self-contained called Orbiter, which is just it's wonderful. It's a sci-fi story that takes place in the 21st century. It's pretty much an alternate reality, but same time as us. But the story takes place at Kennedy Space Center, which has been reduced to slums. It's kind of like the slum village at Kennedy Space Center because 10 years ago they launched a spacecraft into outer space to find new things, new planets. And Venture was gone for 10 years and it never returned. And then after the 10-year anniversary, the Venture returns and reappears at Kennedy Space Center after its absence and is a much different spacecraft than it was when it left. People had thought that the astronauts that were on board were dead and long gone, but when the spacecraft reappears, they discover that it has developed an alien-like skin as opposed to being made of metal. It is seemingly alive, and the astronauts who were inside are actually also alive, but changed, and it's a wonderful, wonderful graphic novel. Is so fascinating to me, and I think it's one of Warren Ellis's best stories. I think it would make for a fantastic movie as well.
I have two picks, and I'm kind of cheating with one because it already was adapted, although I don't really care for this adaptation. The first one, though, which hasn't been adapted, but I think for almost a decade people have been trying to adapt it, is a really great graphic novel I read years ago by Charles Burns called Black Hole. Which is about set in I think it's in the suburbs of Seattle, and it's about teenagers who start catching this sexually transmitted disease that actually makes you get mutations on your body, and so anyone who gets it becomes a social outcast. And it talks about like teenagers and relationships and how some of them go off and kind of start their own little community where they can get away from society. And it's a really just I remember reading it. I first heard about when I heard that David Fincher was going to do an adaptation of it. You wouldn't believe the names that have been attached to this adaptation. Yeah, it's really gorgeous art by Charles Burns, and I really would love to see that style. I hope that they do make it. They keep the black and white look. But yeah, so Black Hole is one that I've always remembered, and I really, really am looking forward to it being made if it does ever get made. I mean, for instance, Roger Avery and Neil Gaiman were going to originally adapt the screenplay for it, and they left. And then David Fincher came on, but then he left. But apparently he's back on, and now another director's put his hat in the ring, Rupert Sanders, who did Snow White and the Huntsman. Apparently he wants to make it, but it's still in limbo. And I'm hoping that with the recent success of It Follows, which I feel like is a movie we've mentioned on every single Indiecast for the last month, which is also a kind of a strange movie involving STDs and causing all these weird effects.
Paranormal STDs.
That maybe the success of that will kind of help kickstart an adaptation of Black Hole. The second one I want to bring up is actually a manga by Junji Ito called Uzumaki, or Spiral. Wow. I totally love that series. It's just this crazy story about this town in Japan that suddenly spirals start showing up everywhere, and then it starts causing the weirdest, craziest things imaginable. People's bodies start turning into spirals. People start disappearing into spirals. People start turning into snails. They just start walking. They start growing shells on their back, and they turn into a snail. And then the spiral starts expanding itself to space and time, so you can't actually leave the town because you're just caught in a spiral. Time starts losing meaning because the time is caught in a spiral as well. It's just this bonkers, crazy story. And there is an adaptation from back in like 2000 or 2001 that I know it's kind of a cult classic. I was never a big fan of it. I think that's just something that's so ripe for like a really, really good, freaky adaptation. I think it could work as like a limited series, but I would say read that and cross your fingers that maybe someone will have the balls to adapt it again.
Yeah, that would sounds fantastic. I've never heard of that. So that's pretty cool. I'm gonna have to check that out. Susan, have you read any comics that you think that would make for a great movie or TV show?
Well, I already kind of confessed that I don't read a lot of comics, but I did have a period in the mid-2000s where I read some manga because I went to an art school, and that's what happens. Are you guys ever into a movie like that you wouldn't be into, but then like a director gets attached to it, and then you're like kind of into it? So Warner Brothers got the distribution rights to an anime series called Death Note, which is actually a pretty popular one, or at least it was in 2007. And the first time I heard about it is because we were talking about Iron Man 3 earlier, but like Shane Black got attached to it.
Oh.
I was like, holy shit, that might be interesting, because I don't have a lot of faith for translating manga to live action somehow, just because I need to see the precedent, I guess.
Right.
But basically, this is a series that there's this guy named Light. He finds this magical book, and he finds out that if he writes his name, like writes a name in it, he can actually kill that person. So it's kind of this thing about too much power and when power makes you evil and blah, blah, blah. But what really makes the story interesting, or at least to me, maybe I just like characters, but so there's kind of this cat and mouse chase that happens where there's this guy named L. He's like super prolific, but he's like bizarre. He's just such an intriguing character because he's kind of like childlike and mysterious, but like insanely intelligent. And I think what makes this series works is that their intelligence is so well matched that you never really know who's going to win. And I just thought somebody like Shane Black could actually take, these things and treat it with respect. However, he got pulled away from the project to work on Iron Man 3. So he isn't on it anymore. The new director on it is Gus Van Sant, who he does like.
That's not bad.
Wow,
that's not bad.
I'm like shocked because okay, this is a really popular franchise in Japan, so
right.
It's a big franchise. But
it's
I'm
popular
shocked.
here, I would argue.
And it was an animated series too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an animated series, and it did get translated to live action in Japan, and I saw it, and it was pretty good. But I mean, Japan doesn't have the industry to do live action that the U.S. would be able to provide for this. And I'm just shocked with the names that are getting attached to this, because I haven't seen an anime really get that sort of like respect, I guess you would say. I think I'd make a better TV show, honestly.
Yeah, Death Note would be great. I haven't I started watching the anime, but I haven't finished it yet. I was really into it, so I should probably pick that back up.
It's one of the ones that if you're not really into anime, it's a good starter because it's engaging enough for sure.
Yeah, the premise is really cool too. Like it's really great. I want to throw in another one, and this is one of the dearest books I own. Another self-contained story. It's by Grant Morrison.
Oh yeah,
with his frequent collaborator Frank Quitely, who has one of my favorite names. It's a pseudonym, but Frank Quitely doing the art and Grant Morrison writing. It's a story called We Three.
Yes.
Which is it's so near and dear to my heart. Have you guys seen Homeward Bound? Do you remember that movie?
Dude, I'm 29. Of course I saw Homeward
Bound. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. You're with me.
That was my life. Like I thought animals just talked. Like
yes.
Okay, so keep that in mind as I talk about this plot. This is basically Homeward Bound, but with a technological twist, I guess. It's a darker version, but it's a dog, a cat, and a rabbit. Okay.
They've been weaponized.
They've been weaponized. They've been genetically engineered with robotic armor, with which they have these implants where they have like guns and like razors attached to their armor. So they're these like deadly animals, but inside they're really just still a dog, a cat, and a rabbit. Their names are Bandit. That's the dog. Tinker, who's the cat. And Pirate is the rabbit. So it's basically like Homeward Bound, except that it's the reverse. They're fleeing. They're fleeing from the people who made them like this, who turned them into these weapons, and they're trying to escape the military. And on their route to escape, they encounter civilians, like other people who some are nice, some are mean. They encounter other weaponized animals who have more advanced weapons than them and are trying to hunt them down. And they kind of are also they form a friendship because along with their armor, they're also given the ability to speak, however minimally, to each other. So they have these kind of one-word conversations with each other as they help each other try to escape to freedom. And it's a great story. And with Frank Quitely's probably my favorite comic book artist of all time. It's a beautiful art, and the ending. The last page of this comic book just had me in tears. It's one of the most beautiful things. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I'll never forget it. And I think as a movie, this would just be jaw-dropping.
And I second that. And I know that it was in development a few years ago. I remember Grant Morrison talking about it, that someone had bought the rights, someone was writing a script, and then that was it. Never heard anything else. I was like, well, great, when I heard that news. But maybe as an animated film, I don't know. Warner Brothers puts out those 75-minute, straight-to-video animated, superhero movies. We Three could really work, and then it could retain Quitely's art, sort of an inspiration the way they did for All-Star Superman, which he also did with Grant Morrison.
Let's talk about All-Star Superman.
Okay.
All-Star Superman is the best Superman story that I've ever read. And it'll never be a movie, but it should be.
It's an animated film. They did make an animated film.
Yeah, you know what I mean, though. Like, they're not going to make a live-action version of this. But have you guys heard of this, CJ and Susan?
No, I haven't.
So All-Star Superman is a story where Superman, his powers come from the sun. That's how he's kind of supercharged, and that's where he's fueled almost. And in this story, he flies too close to the sun. His body is overwhelmed with these solar rays, and basically, he's told that he's going to die in just a short amount of time. So it's basically a story about Superman in his final days and how he chooses to live the last days of his life. And it's a really meditative story. It's beautifully done. I think it's by Frank Quitely as well.
Yeah, it's Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same duo, and it's also just kind of this somber melancholy that I think would make for a wonderful movie. Almost feels like Terrance Malick on the page, like a Terrance Malick Superman story, which I think would be fantastic. But I don't think they're ever going to make the shit because it's too artsy fartsy.
I would say that from the sounds of it, that sounded like the worst Hollywood pitch ever. It's like, okay, guys, it's really sad and melancholy. The superhero dies, and it's like Terrance Malick. They'd be like, get out of my office.
Well, I thought, when...
Well, Man of Steel, those early scenes in Man of Steel, it's one of the things I thought was one of the strengths of it, is that they really play that up. And, that was sort of the running joke that Snyder is always aping another director, another style, and then, for the first half hour, 45 minutes, when we're talking about Superman's origin before he becomes Superman, it's pretty much a Terrance Malick film. As he's wandering the earth or wandering the United States, trying to find himself. And there are shots of like wheat and grass and hands moving through, and the magic hour Twilight stuff. I was like, okay, he really is doing.
The first trailer was, and I was like,
yeah, absolutely,
it's going to be good.
Right.
Like this looks like All-Star Superman, and then it turned out to be Man of Steel.
Well, I always feel like they have to make allowances and compromises. Maybe I'm being too easy on them. The criticism of Superman Returns was, hey, there's not enough action. There's not a supervillain to match Superman, and so we need some, these giant punch-ups. And then Man of Steel, basically the last 45 minutes, that's all it is. And I think it was a mistake in that.
Yeah.
They went overboard. They went, too far in one direction.
I agree with Bernard. I think Superman should have been dying of a terminal illness.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just great. I think that's one of the biggest criticisms of the Superman character is that he's almost omnipotent. But I think that story really just makes him so human and so vulnerable in a way that no other Superman story has. I mean, Kryptonite is just bullshit to me. I think it's like clearly just an excuse. It's like, oh shit, I think we got to give this guy something to.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It needs to be. Let's make up a Kryptonite, green crystal from a Krypton that hurts him. It's one of the most disgusting contrivances I've ever seen this story, but people accept it. Whatever. A few quick ones. I'd say Why the Last Man would make for a great TV show, not a movie.
Right, they've tried to make it a movie.
Yeah. I don't think it would work as a movie. Fables, even though there's Once Upon a Time out there, I think Fables would. That's Bill Willingham's book. Would make a fantastic TV show. And Runaways, Marvel's Runaways.
Yeah.
Which I think should have been a movie a long time ago. It was in development. I knew someone who was working on it years ago, but it just never went through. Runaways is basically the Breakfast Club, but set in the Marvel universe. It's about these three teenagers or young people who gain powers and cross paths with Captain America occasionally. It's really cool, a lot of fun.
And it's the same writer who did Y the Last Man.
Brian K. Vaughan.
Right.
Brian K. Vaughan, yeah. And Preacher is my favorite comic book of all time, and I think that one is becoming a TV show by Seth Rogen.
Seth Rogen.
Of all people.
Of all people.
Yeah, that's my favorite one. But I think that's going to wrap it up for today, guys. We're going to be back next week talking about more indie movies. Thank you to our special guest, Mel Valentin. Thanks for being on here with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, come back. You can have CJ and we'll take you.
Susan just bartered. She just traded you in Mel.
Oh, baseball season's about to start. Okay, you could start.
Yeah, no, it was really fun. And Susan, of course, Susan and CJ. CJ, you're my buddy. I love having you on the show. And where can we find you on social media, CJ?
Well, you can find me embarrassing myself on Twitter at CJ_Prin or CJ_PRIN.
And Susan, where can we find you on Twitter?
At Susan_Kemp.
Mel, where can we find you on Twitter and where can we find your stuff?
You can find me on Twitter under Fyodor Fish, and that's double F. I've been using that name for years. So FYODORFISH. And you can find my reviews on Next Projection, Screen Evasion, Very Aware, among other sites, but those are the ones I'm writing for currently.
And I am at BJ_Boo. And to find me, CJ, and Susan's work, go to way2indie.com. Find us on Facebook. Find us at way2indie on Twitter. Find us on Instagram. Find us on Spotify. Where else are we? We're on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and find this podcast on iTunes. Where you can subscribe to us. We'd really appreciate that, as well as a rating and a review. And also on Stitcher Radio. It's been a lot of fun, and we'll see you next week, guys.
Great. Thanks again.